This is Into the Mix, a Ben & Jerry's podcast about joy and justice, produced with Vox Creative. I'm Ashley C. Ford.
Everyone's heard the stories, but I thought they were exaggerations.
Right.
Like, you think there's no way in the world that that's happening.
It's really inefficient government. We need to stop using the court system as a virtual ATM.
I usually am the one that's like, no, we should run up on the mayor right now. You know what I'm saying? Like, we should run up on her right now.
In our final episode of our series from St. Louis and the Workhouse, How to Close a Jail. Let's get into it.
I got elected kind of out of the Ferguson protest movement. I didn't know a lot about our pretrial detention system until the Ferguson uprising.
Megan Green is the president of the St. Louis Board of Aldermen, which is basically St. Louis's city council.
You know, I looked at it and was like, this is pretty much a debtor's prison, and those are supposed to be illegal, and we're still operating them today. And so it's sort of like, once you know, you can't unknow, and once you know, you have a responsibility to do something about it.
She was at the very first meeting for the Close the Workhouse campaign in 2018. Getting behind that community effort was a no-brainer for the alderwoman, but that wasn't the story for the rest of her colleagues.
I think that there's still a lot of connotation or misunderstanding that folks that were in the workhouse were violent offenders and folks that had already been convicted of crimes. And so there was a lot of education that needed to happen about what pretrial detention was, exactly the types of crimes that folks were being accused of, how long they were sitting in jail, what was happening to them in their lives in terms of losing employment opportunities and connections with their families because they were sitting there for so long. So there was just a lot of, I think, work that had to be done to kind of re-educate folks on what the workhouse actually was.
Eventually, the aldermen got a re-education, but it was a political re-education.
I think there was enough people contacting board members, and the narrative had changed enough in our city about the atrocities of the workhouse that it got to this point where it was not politically feasible to take the stance of, we're not closing this down.
We tried to keep our foot on their necks. We showed up at every hearing possible that had anything to do with the Close the Workhouse campaign or the workhouse itself.
That's Hattie Svoboda-Stell. She worked alongside Mike Milton on the bail project as a bail disruptor. She says the strategy was three-pronged: litigation, which ACD was all over, bail, which the bail fund was all over, and then
we had folks regularly testifying at Board of Aldermen meetings.
And the third prong: making sure candidates for offices all over the city were on the same page to shut down the workhouse.
We led marches, I think really making it visible and making them aware of the fact that not only should they care because they're people who live here and supposedly should care about the needs of their constituents, but also putting pressure on them to care if they don't already.
This piece was led by Action St. Louis.
Every time that there was a election for an alderman, we were asking them as Action St. Louis and putting out a voter guide, like, where do you stand on public safety? Where do you stand on closing the workhouse?
That's Jay Shepard, an abolition organizer for Action St. Louis. After tons of public pressure, the Board of Aldermen unanimously passed a bill in 2020 to close the workhouse by the end of that year. The advocates celebrated their win, but it was short-lived.
Many members of the board said, oh, well, this legislation wasn't to close the workhouse. This legislation was to think about closing the workhouse, to begin talking about a process of maybe thinking about, dreaming about, considering closing the workhouse.
That's Inez Bordeaux again. If you're just joining us, be sure to listen to the first 2 episodes in this series on the workhouse.
we had to pick the fight back up. We thought we were at the beginning of the end of the process, but we weren't. We had to keep going. We had to keep organizing.
The Close the Workhouse Coalition began to set its sights at the top of city government. They needed a mayor who would be on their side.
The very first question everyone was asked for months, 4 or 5 months, was, where do you stand on closing the workhouse? Where do you stand on re-envisioning public safety? And when it all came down to it, the person who had been calling for the closure of the workhouse before the campaign even existed and ran on the idea of re-envisioning public safety and closing jails and reallocating money in ways that were more beneficial to the community instead of using it in a carceral way was the person that won, and that was Mayor Tashara Jones.
Tashara Jones, what's going on with the city's jails?
Yes, absolutely. It's deplorable, the conditions that our detainees are currently in our city jails. I've been advocating for closing the workhouse since 2016.
Tashara Jones was the one candidate who stayed steadfast in her commitment to close the workhouse during the campaign season.
What are you going to do in the first 100 days? The number one thing.
We're going to close the workhouse and make sure that we do a top to bottom audit of all city departments.
And when Tashara Jones got elected as mayor in April 2021, she delivered on her promise, big time.
In our very first budget, we zeroed out the workhouse and removed our city's detainees and corrections staff from the inhumane conditions there.
The last detainee left the jail within Jones's first 100 days.
It feels big.
Yeah.
It feels really big, and it feels dreamy. It feels like another world is possible.
Jay says this moment in St. Louis's history was transformative.
It feels like we could do anything if we are in community and operating in community.
When we come back, the abolitionists in St. Louis continue the fight. We'll take a look at their most recent campaign to reimagine the workhouse.
I like the glow in the dark, and so she would make me my own little pot of this yellow.
Her nails are campaign colors, so this is like...
Yeah, this is glow, this is Close the Workhouse yellow.
The story of how Inez and her community closed one of St. Louis's debtors' prisons is one that lives not only in her memory, she also wears it on her body. That time of her life is one she can never forget. Jay feels similarly. How does it feel to know that this was accomplished or this progress was made, not by anybody's, one person stood up, not, one piece of it. It's a community effort. How does it feel to know that, like, you changed this massive issue? You all changed this massive issue together with community backing.
Like, if we could close this, like, what also can we build together that is anti-carceral and that centers community and centers community needs and, like, also, like, feels like it's really birthed in love for community.
Here's Mike Milton, founder of the Bail Project in St. Louis.
I want people to know that was the hard work of organizing, sitting with people as they talk about their terrible stories with this place and with St. Louis. And we mobilized them to feel powerful and feel power over themselves and their community enough to close a jail.
I think to be a community organizer, to be an activist, is to hold a belief that a different future is possible, like, at all times. So anything that you might be organizing toward is an achievable and possible future, even if it's not something that comes in your lifetime.
Hattie Svoboda-Stell, bail disruptor for the Bail Project in St. Louis.
You don't really see the significance or something when you're just in it every single day. But looking back, the fact that we were able to literally empty and close a jail is historic. It's unbelievable, and it doesn't happen very often.
It might not happen often, but Hattie, Mike, Blake, Jay, Deidre, Inez, and their community of abolitionists actually got what they wanted. They won. No one is in the workhouse right now. While this particular ending isn't very common, the truth is jails and prisons close all the time for different reasons.
Hochul's budget calls for closing as many as 5 state prisons.
The State Department of Corrections announced this morning it would recommend the closure of SCI Retreat in Newport Township.
About 2 years ago, Governor Murphy ordered the beleaguered Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women to close.
Jails and prisons do close. But the remarkable thing about this closure is that the city of St. Louis isn't planning to replace the workhouse with another jail. That is rare. And it's a prison abolitionist dream come true. Once the workhouse officially closed, the city of St. Louis actually invested time and money into hearing from the community about what the site of the workhouse could be transformed into. Inez is on the steering committee to re-envision the workhouse. And after a 1.5-year-long process of conversations with the community,
what we decided was that we didn't want any human beings living at the workhouse. We didn't want any human beings living in the facility or on the land because it feels haunted. Mm-hmm. It feels like it's a place where people should not be. Right. There's been too much death, too much harm, too much degradation, too much neglect of people for people to be there. It's in an industrial area in the middle of nowhere.
Food desert.
It's a food desert. There's no bus lines. There's no transportation. It's not zoned for housing. There are environmental concerns that say people should not be here.
Mayor Jones made good on the promises of her first 100 days. But now she's making recommendations in opposition to the community who fueled her election.
And we are confused.
Mayor Jones has proposed building tiny homes on top of the old campus. But environmental reports confirmed what people who've spent time there already knew. That land is poison.
So the EPA came out and tested the land, and they said in order to make it safe for animals, they would have to put 3 feet of gravel on top of the land and then dirt, topsoil, grass in order to make it safe for animals. So once we heard that, none of us wanted people living there to begin with. The only people who think putting a homeless shelter or moving unhoused people to the workhouse is a good idea are the people who have never been to the workhouse.
Right.
If you've ever spent any amount of time, even one night, you would say this is a terrible idea. We really thought we were at the beginning of the end of the process, and now we're right back fighting. To make sure that the demands of the directly impacted people are adhered to and that we're not disappearing another vulnerable population to the middle of nowhere. And so now the fight continues.
Advocates like Blake Strode, the executive director at Arch City Defenders, say a big part of that fight is giving ourselves the space to reimagine public safety. He says the closure of the workhouse is a beacon.
I do think what that adds up to in the public consciousness is a belief that transformation is actually possible, that the conventional wisdom is often wrong because people heard for months and months, people heard all of the, so-called experts, all of the policymakers, all of the elected officials just dismissing the notion that this jail could be closed. And yet here we are. And I'll tell you what has not happened. We have not seen the parade of horribles, you know? We haven't seen just chaos in the streets that we were told early on. Well, if you close the workhouse, it's just St. Louis is going to be some sort of hellhole. Well, that hasn't happened. So I think people understand that conventional wisdom can't be trusted, and that those that are upholding the status quo are oftentimes just doing so out of a sense of inertia, not because they actually have thought about the issue in a serious, rigorous way, and they need to be challenged and pushed. You know, it's a sort of cliche thing to say now, where we say people that are closest to the problems are closest to the solution, but it actually is true. You know, the people, the families that had experienced that jail and all of the things around it for generations, they knew exactly what that place was. And the people that had never been there, that are sitting in City Hall, they didn't know any of that.
Right.
And so, you know, I think it causes us to kind of think about sources of authority in a different kind of way, which is, of course, one of the things that organizing really offers us.
I'm from Indiana. Okay. Indianapolis, Indiana is where I live now, but I'm from Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Okay.
It's Indiana. Who's your girl? I often think about the fact that people in general in Indiana have a hard time believing that things can change, and certainly that people without money or political power can change them. It's not all the time. We've got organizers. We've got people working on that and working on those issues. But I see what's happening here, and I can't help but wonder, like, do you think this is the kind of thing that can be replicated in more places across the country?
Absolutely, unquestionably. And, you know, I'm not naive enough to think we're the first to engage in this kind of work, right? And to achieve important wins like this. So we've taken important lessons from organizers in New York, organizers in Atlanta, organizers in California. And so I think there's a kind of shared knowledge and shared praxis around this kind of work that's really important. And I absolutely think that it can be replicated. And so you start bringing enough people together and with enough clarity and enough passion, and you can really get some things done.
I'm inclined to agree. Inez sees hope on the horizon for other movements across the country. She says this movement can be copied everywhere.
We hope that the Close the Workhouse campaign can be a blueprint for what other cities, what other organizations can do to close the hellhole jail in their city. So remember, you are going to have fierce opposition. There are going to be people who want to maintain the status quo. There are going to be people who are going to tell you what you want to hear and not follow through on it. Your opposition is going to be well-funded, and they're going to be loud, and they are going to have money. So you have to go get the people. The only thing that beats that opposition, that beats that money, is people. And that's what we did here in St. Louis. And if we can do it, Philly can do it. If we can do it, New York can do it. If we can do it, LA can do it. If we can do it, Detroit can do it. If we can do it, New Orleans can do it. If we can do it, Houston can do it. Like, there is literally nothing standing in your way if you go get your community and you make sure that the work you are doing is led by the people that are most impacted by the issue. So just do it.
Inez still steps into her nursing uniform a couple times a week.
But that's not my life anymore, unfortunately. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like, that's not my life anymore, unfortunately, because now, like, I'm too angry to do nursing full time.
Right.
I'm too angry to dedicate my life toward that. It's just different.
It doesn't give you what it used to give you.
It doesn't give me, thank you, because I was struggling to find the words. It doesn't give me what it used to give me. And Missouri's bad for that.
Yeah.
Like, they're bad. Like, this is going to sound corny, maybe a little cliche. And if they ever make a movie about me, I want this in the movie. I don't care how corny it is. But like, I legit made a vow, like to myself, that I was going to spend the rest of my life tearing down the systems that tried to destroy me. Wow. You're bad, Missouri. Like, my goal is to make the state of Missouri, the people, the systems, those who want to uphold the status quo, like, rue the day they ever saw my name on a charging document and decided to come after me, because you've brought this upon yourself. You could have left me alone.
The workhouse is empty, but it's not closed. It's a win for now.
The win means, like, the workhouse is closed. The towers have been knocked down, that the barbed wire is gone, the bars have been removed, and that there is a solid plan for something else. Even the mayor affirming that it will never be used as a jail again is also not a win. Like, when the bars are down, when they knock those guard towers down, that is the win. But the one concession I am willing to make is that once the final decision has been made about what the workhouse is going to be turned into, we will have a party, even though it's not closed or the guard towers aren't knocked down. Like, we're going to go into the parking lot, we're going to have a barbecue, and we're going to block off the street, and we're going to kick it, and we're going to have a good time as a way to sustain us as we make it through the rest of this process.
If you feel inspired to end the vicious cycle of cash bail in your community, remember this.
Never take your foot off of their necks. Like, go out and get your people and organize your people and tell your stories, because that's how we shifted just the entire way that St. Louis thinks about public safety. We started telling the stories of people who were being housed in the workhouse and really focusing on, like, humanizing those people. So go get your people and organize. And if we can do it, y'all can do it too.
Into the Mix is a Ben & Jerry's podcast produced with Vox Creative. This episode was written by Priscilla Alabi. The Vox Creative team includes lead producers Priscilla Alabi and Jules Bradley, production supervisor Taylor Henry, and production manager Jessica Bay. Martha D. Sally is our supervising producer. Anu Subramanian is our executive producer. The team also includes Vivian Chi, creative services manager, Ariana Jiffo, senior manager of creative services, and post-production stars Greg Russ, Andrew Hammond, and Felicia Dominguez. Kyle Neal engineered this episode. Original music by Israel Tutson. A special thank you to Kelly Young, our sensitivity reader, and Zoe Malik, our fact checker, for their expertise. And to Ariane Young for her support. The Ben & Jerry's team includes Jay Tandon, Jay Curley, Sanjana Mahesh, Chris Miller, and Polly Gamako. I'm Ashley C. Ford. Thank you for listening.
Vox Creative.